come back. Every year I get newer. I'm the dust on the moon. I'm the trash in the sewer. Let's go. I come back. Every year I get brighter. If you thinking hip hop is alive.
Now, let me set the stage for you. Here's a picture, and I just like skulls, so I put that up there. But what you see here is, and you may not be able to see it here, but I'll send you the slides later. What you see is, starting about 8 million years ago, it's about 8 million years ago that what they call the Homo pan split occurred. Meaning this is where the human lineage, Homo sapien lineage, essentially split from our other primate cousins. Now, if whether or not you've looked at this stuff and you've studied it a lot, there's a lot of stories out there. This one just happens to be the one that's being proposed by science right now. So about 8 million years ago, in this place called the Great Rift Valley in northeast Africa. And it's called the Rift Valley. It's a rift between two continental plates. So there's a lot of volcanic activity, and it's mountainous. And what happened in the Rift Valley is primates began walking upright. The first thing that occurred is we started to walk upright. And whenever we began to walk upright, it changed society. Everybody knows that primates live in groups, in communities, in troops. Gorillas live in troops, etc., right? The family structure changed, or the societal structure changed, whenever we began walking upright. Because something happened. Whenever you're walking upright, whoever's the most efficient walker can carry food. So suddenly it wasn't the biggest, strongest, meanest guy, male, that was the alpha male. It was the one who could provide the most food. It was the one who could carry the most resources. So this is where society began to change. Now what we know is life was pretty good in this Rift Valley. It was a temperate climate, right? And then something happened. There was a big change. There was a climate change. Now to give you a perspective of when this occurred, here's a good time frame. Think about all of recorded history, going back to the Egyptians, 5,000 years ago. Take that time, double it to 10,000 years. That's the beginning of agriculture, when we started to domesticate plants. Take that time and double it, 20,000 years. That's the time when we were painting on cave walls in southern France. You guys ever seen the cave paintings? You ever seen those? No. I'll get you some pictures. It's really cool. So we started painting on cave walls. That was 20,000 years ago. We were already artists then. Take that time and double it 6 more times. 3.1 million years ago. Climate change in the Great Rift Valley. This is the beginning of the Ice Age. The northern hemisphere started to cool, right? We got ice sheets coming down. And what happened in Africa is it dried out. Got warmer. Food got scarce. Stress went up. So these creatures that were not yet Homo sapiens, humans, they started moving around. And there's a couple different lines or lineages that started moving. One was called Homo erectus. Homo erectus went into Europe, or mostly into Asia. Neanderthal went into Europe. So they started to move around. What's interesting is we find skulls. We find fossils. And we can look at the fossils and we can figure out stuff about their brains, which is pretty cool. Because what they do is, if you take a skull and you hollow out the inside, right? Because see how this guy has all this dirt and bone and stuff in there? They hollow out the inside and they put plaster in and they make what's called an endocast. And they pull it out and they can get an idea what the brain looked like. And we can see that some of these creatures actually had bigger brains than us. For instance, the Neanderthal. They were the ones that mostly moved into Europe. They lived on the edge of the ice sheet. They chased big game. They had rudimentary tools. So they had hand axes and they had jabbing spears. And they looked for big game to chase down. They also had they were bigger bodied. They had a really high caloric demand, like 5,000 kilocalories per day. And they had bigger frontal lobes than us. They actually had smaller temporal and parietal lobes. But their frontal lobes, you know that rationalizing thinking part? Those were bigger in Neanderthal, who happened to have gone extinct about 20,000 years ago. They were our oldest living relative. But they're all gone now. Anyhow, we can look at their brain size and we can see certain areas had developed. Like one you see here on your page called Broca's area. Now, Broca's area is associated with language development. It's not really the language part of the brain. It's not where language lives, because language is modular. Just like pain is modular or vision is modular, they live in different areas. But Broca's area, and if you look at where it is, it's kind of right next to the motor cortex, where the tongue and mouth and lips would live. Broca's area is associated with being able to create sounds that eventually we turn into words. Create the sounds that eventually we give meaning to and make words. So what's interesting is we think Neanderthal, they could make some rudimentary language. But it lacked probably the complexity that we have it today. Now, along with the climate change, something really interesting happened. And I like this photo, so I'm going to show it to you now. During the last ice age, about 164,000 years ago or so, humankind nearly went extinct. We know this because we can look at the DNA sequence, we can look at DNA evidence that shows we have really little diversity. You guys realize that in our DNA? We're virtually the same. Now, when I say that, it's virtually, right? Because every one of us, every individual is genetically different. There's no two individuals that are identical. Even identical twins, they're not identical. But the nucleotide diversity is like 0.1%, it's like 1 in 1,000 in the strands of DNA. Now what happens is, that's a lot more, or it's a lot less than we see in other primates. Gorillas, chimps, orangutans, our closest relatives, they have a lot more diversity, like 4 to 8% more diversity. And what that suggests is they have lots of intermingling, or some intermingling between groups. Since humankind has such small diversity, it suggests at some point there was a bottleneck, meaning we almost died out. In fact, the numbers that they're saying, depending on who you read, it's about 600 breeding individuals. 600 breeding individuals that eventually, what do we have now, 7 billion populating the earth? Over 3 billion in the United States alone. From these 600 intrepid individuals. And the coolest way I ever seen this described or displayed was, it was on a PBS show. You guys like PBS? I donate a lot to PBS through iTunes, because I buy all their shows on iTunes. And the way that they described it was as a bottleneck. And if you look inside, I got jelly beans inside the bottle, and I'll pass this around after. If you notice, there's a whole bunch of different colored jelly beans, right? Now, whenever food gets scarce, stressors go up, people die off. If you notice, if these are the survivors, can you guys see that? Yeah. Notice that there's a lot less variation. It's one of our survivors. Notice that there's a lot less colors or variation than there are in the glass. There you go.